Hi, I'm Jeff Davis of the Friends of Sonoma County Wine Library here in the Russian River AVA south of Healdsburg at Bacigalupi Vineyards. And my guest is Helen Bacigalupi. Thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Nice to see you.
We've talked numerous times, and I know in your heart you're a country girl.
Right.
So where did you grow up exactly?
All over the West, you might say.
Oh, and back then, most of the West was all pretty much country, wasn't it?
Well, pretty much, yeah. The only time we were in, and it wasn't really city in those days, was when we went down near my aunt's, where she lived in Los Angeles County, and we were there for a short while. I think I went maybe to school there for 2 grades.
Okay.
But then we moved from there up to Kern County in California, and where my father got a job in the oil business. So
You were born in Wyoming, though, is that right?
that's right, and he was an oil driller in Wyoming.
Do you want to say what year you were born?
I was born in 1925, the last day of the year.
Oh, really? Oh.
Right before the Great Depression.
And you said your family was affected by the Depression, so you had a tough childhood.
Absolutely. My mother passed away when I was a small child, and my father's mother came to live with us, and she raised 3 children.
What was your name, your last name then?
Long, L-O-N-G. My father was born in Iowa, and my grandmother divorced her husband when he was a small child, and so I never knew him. It's too bad that I never knew any of the Longs.
Oh, yeah. I was asking you earlier about how you were able to afford college because of the Depression, and why don't you tell me briefly that story?
Well, as I said before, I had an English teacher who told our class that if there was anybody in the class who would like to go to college, they could. And I thought, what a concept. So this was during World War II, and I finished my junior year, and then I thought, well, in order to go, I'm going to have to earn some money. So I went down to stay with my aunt in Los Angeles, and I got a job in a valve factory. Because I didn't have a high school diploma, they made me work out in the shop with the lathe people and that. But I didn't care. I got 5 cents more an hour for working nights as well, so that was fine with me.
But it's an interesting path you had to take. To get to college, you had to drop out of high school.
That's right.
Go work for a while, and then you were able to get a senior degree in a sense.
And then I worked all the time. I was in college. I worked at different pharmacies during the summer or whenever I could, and I worked in a number of different pharmacies in San Francisco.
And that's what you were studying in school?
Yes, that's right.
And where did you go to school?
University of California Medical Center in San Francisco.
And another guy was going to school there named Charlie Bacigalupi.
That's right.
And he was studying to be a
well,
dentist.
we met at Santa Rosa JC.
Oh.
He had come back from the war, and he had been at JC before the war, but he had been discharged and came in late during that session. So. I probably shouldn't tell this, but I think it's so funny.
Oh, then that's why you should definitely tell it.
Well, it's so funny because he stuttered something terrible.
Oh.
And we sat in the first row in the class, and he was right here, and I was right here. And he was trying to say these great big long words, stuttering at the same time. And
Poor guy.
Oh my God, I didn't want to laugh. It was so painful. But we went all through JC together, and we dated, and then for 5 years we went together while we were at San Francisco Medical Center.
Did that play a role in your decision to look into pharmaceutical industry?
I always thought I want to make a living for myself, and I would love to have been a dietitian. But I wasn't sure I would be able to get a sufficient job doing that, so I decided on pharmacy.
And do you think you wanted to be a businesswoman because of the Depression, and you wanted to have a decent lifestyle?
I wanted to have a decent means of making my own way, really.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you left college, ended up marrying Charlie, and moved to Healdsburg.
Yeah, as soon as we finished, neither one of us even went to graduation, but as soon as we finished, we got married. And then we came to Healdsburg. Charles' family in fact, his mother was born up on Chiquita Road, and her father had a winery. Charles' father had a winery in Santa Rosa in the early days.
Do you remember the name of that winery?
Well, I don't think it had a name. It was just a big redwood barn where they made wine, and his grandfather had a grocery store on 4th Street in Santa Rosa. And so they made the wine and sold bulk wine in the grocery store. And Charles has told me about how people would bring their gallon jugs in, and he even worked in the store filling their jugs for them. Probably 50 cents or something for a gallon of wine.
I love that old. And sometimes they just dipped it right in, didn't they?
Well, no, they siphoned it out. But those were the early days. And of course, his mother's father had a huge big winery up on Chiquita Road, but he unfortunately got pneumonia and died at the age of 50. So
his father?
No, his mother's father.
Oh, it's okay. To his grandfather.
Yeah, Bedini was his name.
And they had a winery.
He had a big warehouse in San Francisco where they used to ship the wine to San Francisco. But then the earthquake hit, and they had the terrible fire in San Francisco. The place burnt down, but they still had a house up on Chiquita Road. So of course everything moved up to Chiquita Road, and they carried on. But when he died, his brother was an alcoholic, and he wanted to marry Charles' grandmother, but she refused him, so he went out and burnt the winery down.
So that kind of mentality.
So that was the end of that.
Oh,
so they had to sell the property and so forth. But then his grandmother built a winery on Dry Creek Road. After that, with I guess the money they got from that ranch, I don't know how many acres it was. Quite a spread up there on Chiquita Road, old vines. And she built a winery, as I say, on
Dry Creek?
Yes, on Dry Creek Road. And but then, Prohibition hit, and all of this kind of, and the Depression, and nothing was working. So they converted over to growing prunes like everybody else in this area. That's what the farm advisors advised everybody to do after Prohibition hit. They couldn't sell the grapes, for wineries, so they had to do something else.
Some of the bigger wineries were still selling grapes back east and such, but
that's right.
But you had to be pretty sizable.
For example, used to ship grapes too, because people could still make, I think it was 500 gallons of wine.
200.
Was it 200?
200.
I've kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was always that mark, but it was minuscule, really.
Right.
And this whole area was in prunes when we bought this ranch.
So jumping ahead a little bit, it's not surprising that Charles got into vineyard
well, his
management.
mother always told him, don't ever go into farming, because farmers never have any money. All they have when they pull their pocket out is a pile of dust. She didn't want us to buy this ranch, but we didn't pay any attention to that. We wanted to get in the country, and so we didn't.
Yeah.
But she finally learned to love it, because she was an artist, as you can see some of these paintings here. And so she loved to come up and paint. some of the picturesque views from the place.
Got to understand, there was a horse involved. That's one of the reasons you wanted to have a ranch?
Well, my husband had 2 horses out on his aunt's place out on Dry Creek, and he thought, well, it'd be nice if I didn't have to go out. There was no place to ride out there anyway, so he wanted to have his horses where he could enjoy them.
How long were you two successful business people in your careers before you bought the ranch?
Well, my husband practiced dentistry for 39 years in Healdsburg.
But you purchased a ranch long before that, right?
We were in town for about 5 years.
Okay.
And then he rented his office always. He never owned his own office. He rented from Eddie Beeson, and his son was a dentist as well, and his daughter was a dental hygienist. So but they had an extra office, so they actually asked Charles to come to Healdsburg because there was a shortage of dentists at that time. This is right after the war, you know. So that made Charles happy because his relatives were here, and so it worked out fine for him. But
so was it about 10 years later you bought the ranch? Because wasn't it
no,
1956?
it was about 5 years later.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Eddie Beeson, the father, said he knew we were looking for a place in the country, and he said to Charles, "Listen, I heard the old Goddard place is for sale. Why don't you go down and see it?" And so we did. First thing, being a country girl, I said, "Where do you get your water?" And because we're up on the hill here, you know, we're not connected to the Russian River or any source of water. So they showed me a spring right below the old Goddard house, and I said, "Can I taste the water?" And she said, "Sure." And man, this is good. Of course, it's not chlorinated. It's beautiful water. You know, in town, all the water is chlorinated. Yeah. People used to come out and tell me, "Your coffee is wonderful," and I used to think, why should that be? You know, I'm using the same coffee everybody else is. Well, how come? But then it dawned on me, no chlorine.
Oh.
And it made all the difference.
I bet.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Took me a while to figure that out.
I'm sure the same thing works for beer and wine as well.
Sure, that's right. Yeah, there's a difference.
So you bought it, the 121 acres?
Yeah, the Goddards at that point, they'd been here since the 1800s, 5 generations. The last generation had no children. So, of course, and Jim Goddard, the last male, had died in 1950. Yeah, I'll come to him in a minute. Because we bought the place in 56, so he died in 1955. So first they were willing to sell, but they said we'll have to wait a month before our contract runs out with this realtor. We don't have to pay the commission. So I said, well, that's fine. We're in no hurry. So we waited, and then they wanted $35,000. I got them down to 30.
Already working the business, weren't you?
Well, there were the 3 old ladies, so that made it easy to split 3 ways. So,
clever.
Yeah, and they financed it. I asked them if they would finance it, and they said yes.
Oh, great.
So that was good. But then we had to sell the house in town. We had quite a nice house in town. And it didn't sell, well, this was April 1st when we first consummated the deal. It didn't sell for until December.
Oh.
But that was okay because I had my old house up there, and I painted that whole house myself, the whole interior of it, and,
wow.
and fixed it up some. And so by the time we sold the house in town, we were able to move in December of 1956.
And coincidentally, the property here had about 16 acres of Zinfandel, is that what I understand?
Something like that, yeah. And old prune snags. I don't think we ever harvested any prunes. It had a little 5-acre cherry orchard, which we harvested Royal Land cherries, and there was a place in Sebastopol that was making maraschino cherries. So we were able to sell them over there for about 5 years. And there were 8 walnut trees, and we harvested those. There was a place in Sebastopol that were doing walnuts, so we did those. But there wasn't any way to make any money on the place, so what we did, the first year we realized that we needed to make some money off the place to pay the taxes. So we went down to Fred McMurray's ranch down the river, and he was breeding purebred Angus steers. And so we bought 10 little Angus steers, and we put fence around all the old snaggy orchards and just left the trees there. The animals could eat whatever dropped on the ground, and so we did that for about 10 years.
Did you buy the steers from Fred himself, or just his
Well,
hands?
no, he had a manager.
Was he around though?
Yeah.
Did you ever get to
Well,
know
he
him?
used people. We never met him, but people in town used to say he'd come. They came up every summer, he and his wife and children. You know, he adopted two daughters, and they used to come up. One of his adopted daughters, still lives down.
Yeah, she still runs that ranch. Yeah,
that's right.
Very nice lady.
Yeah. Gallo owns the place now, by the way.
Right.
And it's all vineyard.
Right. Yeah.
That where they could plant.
Yeah. So during this time, Paul Heck had been a patient of yours,
Yes,
of
that's
Charlie's,
right.
and
That's right.
he suggested that you guys might want to consider planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Well,
because,
he didn't suggest what variety because
he just
nobody
said-
was planting those varieties here at that time.
Okay.
Everything was Zinfandel, Mission, Alicante, Golden Chasselas, once in a while some Riesling. I mean, it was Cabernet. But fortunately, Charles' patient was Bob Sisson. He was the farm advisor for the vineyards.
Oh.
And so they started to pay a little bit. When we first started out for the grapes, we hauled off over to Fapiano.
Oh.
They only paid about $50 a ton. Hardly paid to pick them. And it's funny. One day I called up Louis and said, the grapes are ready to pick, can I bring them in? He said, no, I'm still doing my prunes. I said, my God, Charles, we got to do something else. So I called Sagacio and sold. He didn't have prunes, so then we sold Sagacio for a number of years. But you just, I mean, it's hardly worth doing anything extra. But then all of a sudden they started to pay a little bit more. Oh, I meant to say that we thought they were making wine from our grapes. They made wine, but it was all sold to Gallo, both of them.
Oh.
So that's where the grapes went. But the wine.
And
but
you planted 6 acres of Pinot and Chardonnay.
well,
That's-
so Bob
mid-
Sisson,
60s.
so then Charles said, I think we maybe ought to think about planting some vineyard. And so he asked Bob at one time when he was in for some dental work, what would you plant if you were going to plant new vineyard? And he said,
That's a good way to get the truth out of somebody when they're in the dental chair, isn't it?
right. He said, for this climate, I would plant Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And Charles said, I don't know where I'd get anything like that. Nobody has anything around here like that. He says, well, why don't you go down to Livermore to Carl Wente and see if he'll sell you some Budwood.
Yeah.
And so Charles did. And then Bill Wallace had trained over at Davis, and he had been taught how to grow St. George rootstock. And because nobody had that around here at that time, but the university was already starting to realize that you had to have good rootstock,
Right.
or else the vines didn't survive. Mm-hmm. So Joe Rocchioli budded our first vineyards for us because he had been to Davis and they taught him how to bud.
Yeah. And there seems to be some uncertainty as to who planted the first Pinot Noir.
Well, I know
Budwood.
there's some people claim they planted the first Pinot Noir. I really have never challenged anybody about it. I don't think, what difference does it make?
not really
No.
a whole lot.
I don't know if they're ahead of me, that's fine.
Because Rocchioli, had they not planted it
Well,
themselves
no,
at that time?
Rocchioli then said, boy, I think I want to try some of this. So he went down to Carl Wendy and said he'd like to buy some Pinot Noir. And Carl said, no, I don't think I want to sell it to you. And he says, you have to, I'm selling you grapes. So he gave him the Pinot Noir.
That's great.
So told me about that.
Now, do I understand this Budwood from Wente? Did Wente say that this was a suitcase clone
Well, I
variety?
have no idea about that, actually. I do know that they went to France and got the Budwood. That's all I've ever read about that occasion.
Well, now you know they have the Chardonnay, which is the Wente clone, because they weren't able to determine where that came from. So Wente was able to get the designation as the name of the.
Oh, is that right? Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that before.
I don't think they have that with Pinot Noir, but with Chardonnay they do.
Well, we got the Pinot Noir from them as well.
Yeah, right.
And we've stayed with those two clones because they seem to be happy here in this area.
So once things got rolling in the 60s, were you able to make a decent living at that time?
Oh yeah,
as a-
I wouldn't say this if Charles were still here, but he never made much money in the office.
Oh,
He gave his services away. $5 for cleaning teeth, it costs you $300 now.
now about this time, Paul Heck's daughter was expressing some interest in your son, John, or maybe it was the other way around.
We met Pam and her mother at a Farm Bureau meeting, wasn't it?
Was
Yeah,
that
well,
what it
she had
was?
never
She was-
met John before, but
I don't want to get to their marriage yet, because that's a little bit after when you met Michael Gergich of Château Montelena. And it was kind of an interesting story that developed from that relationship.
well, that's right. Mike, I don't know how he heard about our fruit, but
Because he was over in Napa Valley in Calistoga. Did he show up and
Oh
talk
yes,
with you?
he called up out of the blue and said he'd like to come look at the grapes. I said fine, and he went out in the vineyard and tasted a few grapes. He was ecstatic over the flavor, and so.
And he just purchased Chardonnay, is that correct?
That's right. And so, but then in the next spring, I got a letter from the winery saying we won't be interested in your grapes anymore. I said, well, that's fine. Sell them someplace else.
Well, but when did he win the award? The Château Montelena was part
Well,
of the
that was later,
1976.
of course. That was later, 2 or 3 years later, or maybe even more. But by this time, Gergich had moved on. He got a hold of Hill Brothers coffee guy, and he had vineyards over there that he wanted to make use in a winery, and so he got a hold of Gergich, and they built a winery. And the rest is history.
Right. Yes, but you got.
But the year of the award, he called me up to tell me about it. Charles was sailing in the South Seas, and I was home alone, and I thought to myself, this is the 4th of July, I gotta do something special, so I'm gonna bake myself a cake. And I was in the process of doing that when Gergich called me. He said, have you heard the news? I said, no, what's the news? He said, we won against the French Chardonnays. I said, fabulous. And he says, I'd like to buy some more grapes. I said, I'm sorry, Mike, I've sold them all already. So I never sold him any grapes after.
Just that one time.
Or Château
Montelena
either. That was the end of the. Although I have to say, I did sell to another winery over there. In fact, that year that I sold to Château Montelena, when we got through picking for them, 15 tons, this vineyard was 10 years old at that time. And I've always thought this myth about old vineyard is so much baloney, because these were 10 years old at the time. And we got through picking theirs, and I said, Charles, we've still got 20 tons in here or something. I haven't sold them. And I told Gergich that, and he says, well, I heard, let me see, I can't bring up the name now. Anyway, it was a winery over there on Silverado Trail, Cuvée Son, I think. And so I sold him 20 tons of Chardonnay that same year, and then the next year he took another 20 tons, and then that ended.
Well, the Paris tasting from 1976, that was the shot that was the tasting that was heard around the world.
You know, we really didn't realize the significance of it.
Oh, I'm sure you didn't.
No, we were in, you know.
But in a sense, your grapes that contributed to that Château Montelena Chardonnay helped you become the success that you are today,
and
probably.
I never understood why they didn't capitalize on that, but they didn't. On their label, they never mentioned the grapes came from Sonoma County or anything.
No, yeah, they never did get the word out too much that the Sonoma grapes were in that bottle.
But
I think partly just Napa Valley wanted to keep the news in
too,
Napa Valley.
That too. That was really stupid because they really never really capitalized on it at all, which was tragic.
Yeah.
Gergich tried to capitalize on it, but there was no way he could do that, of course, except that he was the winemaker and he got a good boost out of that.
And he left, I think, the following year to start Gergich
Oh,
Hills.
yes, he didn't hang around at all.
No.
But it was so funny. I got over there, you know, I pulled it over there with a Volkswagen pickup on a trailer behind me, and going over that mountain.
Oh, good.
I didn't have much guts in that Volkswagen. And at the bottom of the hill, I would say, "Dear God, don't let anybody get in front of me, or I'll never make it." And it's true, but there wasn't much traffic in those days, so I always made it. But
the Calistoga Road.
Yeah, you know, it's quite a climb over that hill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but I got over there, and they had no scale. I said, "Well, what? 5 o'clock at night." And I said, "Now, what are we going to do now?" So we had to hunt around for some place to weigh the grapes. I mean, he never told me he didn't have a scale, or I could have weighed them here in Healdsburg.
Right.
There used to be a public scale in downtown Healdsburg in the early days. It's gone now, but I could have.
Yeah, that wasn't very thoughtful of him to.
No, people screw up, but you know that taught me a good lesson. I never sold to anybody again that I didn't ask, "Do you have a scale?"
Lesson learned.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So that was the mid-'70s to late '70s, and then in 1982 is when John married Pam.
That's right.
And joined the family. So the Corbell Heck family became part of the Bacigalupi family.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's and Pam's
and
been.
I have 2 granddaughters, and I have 4 great-granddaughters, 4 great-grandchildren. One is a little girl, and the other 3 are boys.
There was a period of time when you made your own wine, and then you stopped for a while, and then you picked it up again.
Well, this is a long story. Yeah, we didn't really.
Can you give me the Reader's Digest version?
Well, you know, Rod Strong and Peter Friedman built a Sonoma. What is it called?
Windsor Vineyards.
Windsor Vineyards, yeah. And so we sold to them for quite a number of years, and then all of a sudden they blew up. They went bankrupt. What happened? So I asked Peter. I asked Peter, what happened that you lost everything? He said, "Well, the banks were just throwing money at us, and we didn't have the sense not to take it. And so they went out and bought 5,000 acres of vineyard.
Oh.
And then we hit a slump, which in those days it used to be, up and down, kind of cyclical.
Sure.
And they hit a slump, and they couldn't pay for things, and they lost everything. They lost their vineyard, they lost the winery. Rod Strong always landed on his feet somehow, but poor Peter was shipped out the door.
That's because Rodney Strong was a ballet dancer.
That's right. That's right. Came in handy.
Yeah, apparently it did.
Yeah. So Peter came to us and said, "Would you like to go in the wine business?" I said, "Well, we might think about it." He said, "We'll develop a label and I'll sell the wine." And so Hambrick had built this facility right below us there. So we had an S corporation between Peter and his wife, Carolyn, and Charles and I. And so this went on with the Chardonnay for 10 years, believe it or not. The original deal, and then we had a milk parlor up here on this ranch because it was a dairy when we bought it, and we spent $50,000 insulating it and fixing it up to store the wine. Then, of course, the corporation had no money, so we loaned the corporation the money to buy our grapes. But interest rates were at about 15%. So we consummated the agreements, the notes very carefully. And after about 10 or 11 years, Peter, without consulting us, sold his half of our corporation to William Hambrick, who I'd never met. And so I said to Charles, they had a party over there, so I said, I'm going to sit across the table from him and see what makes him tick. So during the dinner, he said, would you like to sell your ranch? I said, absolutely not. I said, when I came here, I'm going out of here in a pine box or not at all. I said I wouldn't be interested in that at all, but that night I came home, I never slept all night. I said to Charles, we got to get out of this thing. I can see what the game is. They're going to run this into the ground and try to get our ranch. I said, we've got to get out of this.
You were a smart businesswoman.
So we went to San Francisco and got an attorney, and so I told the attorney, all I want out of the deal is the label, although before we did that, we trademarked the name Bacigalupi. That I said to Charles, we whatever happens, we don't want to lose our name. That's
smart.
Paramount.
Very good.
So I said to the attorney, I want everything connected with the name and the label, and I want Hambrick to be personally responsible for these notes, because I said, if his outfit goes under, we won't get our money, but I know he won't go under. He says, well, I don't think he'll give it to you. I said, well, you have to ask for it. That's not asking very much, because they got everything else. They got all the wine and everything. So that's how it all ended. But the only good thing that happened with it was, I guess, our label was in national distribution, because Peter sold our wine across the United States. That's how he met Rod Strong. He was a drummer. We used to call them drummers. But I should have gotten onto that sooner than I did, because what they did, you can see that gold label over there. That was started out. After that, they were redoing the label, and each label, our name would get smaller and smaller and smaller and clear down to the bottom. I should have realized this. Peter also hooked Bob Young. He had his label, and Fritz Maytag and Rene DeRosa were in the deal. We each had our own label, and Peter was selling the wine. They all went kaput, I was the first one to get out, but the rest of them all got out as well.
So when did you get back into winemaking again?
After that experience?
Yes.
Actually, that was it for Charles and I.
Oh, okay.
We had nothing to do with it, but John and Pam said they'd like to get into the wine business, so I said, okay. So we built this tasting room for them.
So you had the John Tyler label in 2002 and released that for a while.
Right.
Then you brought back in the Bacigalupi name.
Right.
And then the tasting room was up and running in 2011.
Right.
And the rest is history. Although everything before that was history too. Well, you've made quite a success here. Yeah, so you're just kicking back and watching it happen now, aren't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I did my thing.
And I'm sure you taught your son, and I know Pam's very good at business, and they're doing a good job.
John just loves this property. I have to tell you, the schools are not very good here, so we sent him for grammar school, we sent him to a private school in Santa Rosa, which we were so fortunate that was there, called 3R. And then this was during the Vietnam War, and so we looked for a high school closer to home, but the nearest thing we could find was Carlsbad, California. He was a good student.
Yeah.
He got, of course, he had such wonderful training from the 3R school in Santa Rosa. They taught phonics. They don't teach phonics anymore.
I remember that too.
And I remember he wore, at Army Navy Academy, he won an award for spelling.
Huh.
And that was above all of them. He can spell anything, I swear. He's wonderful.
But I'm guessing he was very much more at home in the vineyard and
Oh, he loved
working in
his
the land
place,
rather
absolutely.
than doing the business side.
Yeah,
of
he
it.
couldn't wait to get home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You worked until you were about 86.
I did.
And now you have quite a legacy, though, coming behind you. Pam and John have two daughters, and Nicole and Catherine,
Yes.
Katie. And they have, what, 3, 4 grandchildren? now?
They each have two.
They have 2 kids. So
Yeah.
4 great-grandchildren
That's
for
right.
you. And so the family business will likely continue.
Well, yes, fortunately for us, out of the blue, a guy that had been a winemaker over at the winery below us there, years ago, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 years, he called me up out of the blue. He'd been up in Idaho or someplace, and he came back to Healdsburg for some reason and decided he'd get into real estate. And he called me up and he said, "Would you be interested in buying another ranch?" I said, "Well, I might if it's a good place and, you know, everything
deal,
could work out." And he said, "Well, part of the Frost Ranch is for sale." And I said, "Well, that's just down the road here from us." And so I said, "Well, I'd be happy to look at it." And so we looked at it and we said, "Man, this looks good. It runs to the river." And so we negotiated with the, I don't know, person who was managing their estate. We were the only people that even bid on it.
Oh, great.
But at the same time, just before, Kendall Jackson had been bidding on it, but all of a sudden, Budwood came up for sale, and they couldn't do both of them, so they went that way and left this one. And we were the only people that even bid on it.
Oh, great. Good move.
Yeah. So, fabulous property.
Well, I'm sure it's with your tenacity, your belief in telling it like it is and not
Well,
taking
I do
any
have
crap
to
from
say-
anybody.
I do have to say this, we've had some luck.
Well,
We've
yeah,
had
that
some luck.
also
We
helps,
were
doesn't
lucky
it?
to be able to buy this place, number one. We were lucky to buy the Frost place. We were lucky to buy the Bloom place. It's 85 acres. It just happened. They were working on the freeway, and I was going down West Side Road to go to Santa Rosa, and I see this sign out there. It says a place for sale. And I came home and I said, "My God, Charles, I think the Bloom place is for sale." And at the time, Bloom he was a dairy, but he didn't have enough water for his dairy cattle. So he built a lake back here in a ravine, and it backed up on us. And he told me that we're going to back. I said, "That's fine, I don't mind that, but I want water rights on whatever's on my property. You can have what's on yours." And so we filed for water rights on that, about 5 acre feet. So I said to Charles, "I think the Bloom place is for sale. We needed it for the water."
Yeah.
And so, in fact, we were sucking out of his water. It was a really bad drought year. We were sucking. I thought he was going to come over and hit us over the head, but he never said anything.
So there's some luck, but there's also taking advantage of opportunities.
Well,
too,
that's
and
right,
being
absolutely.
at the right place at
And
the right
so
time.
we came over and to Horace, I said, "Is this place for sale?" He says, "Yes," but he says that sign is for the place in the back. He didn't even have a sign out. The sign was for 85 acres, or no, what is it, 50, I guess. 50. So that sign wasn't even on the property. So But he says, yes, it is for sale. He didn't tell us it was for sale. He was renting our pasture for his dairy cows, and he didn't tell us the place was for sale. Now, I call that luck, don't you?
Sure, but yeah, you looked into it though.
Well, I absolutely. I was scared to death that somebody else would buy it before we could, because we needed that water. You know, there's no water up here except for what we have impounded by man-made lakes. That's all, because we're up here in the hills.
Well, you're certainly a gal who knew how to take advantage of opportunities.
Well,
you know, and you've done a great job.
I've had an awful lot of luck. I do have to say that.
that's
I've
very
had luck. I had luck
humble
carrying
of you.
the grapes over that mountain in the Napa County, let me tell you.
In a
My
Volkswagen.
prayers were all answered. I wouldn't try that these days.
Well, Helen, it's always a kick talking with you, and I appreciate your time and sitting here and chatting with me.
Well,
And,
it's been fun. I enjoyed
continued
it,
success to you, and I hope you go out in something much nicer than a pine box.
Too. Well, who knows? Who knows? I don't think they do pine boxes anymore.
Yeah,
It's
maybe a
just-
nice urn.
Who knows?
Thank you.
I'm going to have my ashes buried right up on the hill with Charles. So I'm never going to leave.